Welcome into the Through the Whistle podcast as a part of CHSN. That's Jake Butt, played his college ball at the University of Michigan. Joshua Perry played my college ball at The Ohio State University. First off, hope everybody had a great holiday season and a happy new year. It is 2025, first show of the year. Very excited to get back at it. Jake, how are you feeling today?
Man, I'm feeling great. It's good to be back with you, JP. It's good to see you again. How was your holidays, man?
It was good. It was the first one with the little guy, got a 9-month-old. He had a great time. He really liked ripping open the wrapping paper. There wasn't much else to it. He's not really into the toys quite yet. It's just stuff for him to stomp on and throw around. But it was a lot of fun being able to spend some time with family, away from work for a little bit after a pretty hectic season. What about you?
Yeah, man, the season, that's what it is, man. The season flies by. Like I was looking at my wife. I had a great holiday season, but I hadn't seen my family in Ohio. I hadn't been to Ohio since I got married. You know, I got married back in April. I hadn't seen them since, last winter. So I was able to spend some time in Ohio with my family, spend some time in Jersey with the in-laws, got to see everybody. So definitely full of travel, but at this point, man, this is what we do. We embrace the traveling, but freaking excited to talk about some football with you right now. I'm really excited to break it down because both our alma maters have gave us a reason to be smiling this holiday season.
Yes, we got a lot of great things to talk about. Before we get into it, we'd be remiss if we didn't send our sincere thoughts and prayers out to people down there in New Orleans. There's that nasty attack on Bourbon Street. There were some lives lost there, many people injured, and we just want to let everybody know that we are thinking of them. The Sugar Bowl between Notre Dame and Georgia was postponed a day because of that, but really sad stuff there. And we just want to let everybody know that we're thinking about them in a very tough time. But I do want to transition to football. I want to transition to the games. We'll start with the CFP quarterfinal games that we saw here, and we might as well go with the team that played first out of our conference. That was Penn State. They beat Boise State 31-14. Just as a side note here, everybody that had a bye lost. Just kind of want to throw that out here for people that are looking. And I mentioned that because Boise State was one of the conference champs. All of them are gone. But one of the teams that got a first-round bye because of their conference championship. This was an interesting game for Penn State here. Drew Aller, not necessarily most stellar day throwing the football. I think he was much better in stats. You tend to agree with that as well. But threw for 171 on 52% completion, 3 touchdowns, though. Very good, productive there. It was the run game, though. And really their ability to bottle up the run game out of Boise State. Ashton Jeanty, Heisman finalist. He had 104 yards, but a ton of volume. Really wasn't hitting any long runs there. But Katron Allen went for $134. Nick Singleton went for 87. They both averaged over 7 yards per carry there. With Penn State advancing now into, I believe, the Orange Bowl down in Miami. What were your thoughts about their game?
Yeah, you laid it out there. I want to start with, let's start big picture just about the team. It was never close. Okay, it was never close. Penn State dominated, and from the jump, it looked like it was going to be an even bigger blowout than what it ultimately ended up being. Penn State jumps out to a 14-0 lead. Then they force a fumble on Jeanty. They forced 2 fumbles on Jeanty that day.
They were smacking
pursuing to the football, pursuing.
Yeah, they were.
So then they're driving. They're down in the red zone, and Drew Aller. I always put this on the quarterback. He fumbles at the mesh point on a read option, and that was the theme of the day. Where they didn't need to do anything cute. They could have dive into the A gap and they were going to score, but they got a little cute. And all of a sudden, Boise State kept hanging around. It never felt like Boise was going to win. But the point is it should have been 21-0, and that game should have been over. So it's a good win, but Penn State didn't play their best game. And they didn't play this is the encouraging part. They didn't play their best game because of things they did to themselves. It wouldn't have mattered. It was nothing to Boise State. They brought some pressures for sure, but it was mostly on Penn State's inability to execute. And as we look forward, Kodo Nicky, it's like almost like a metaphor of life. This is like esoteric philosophy. What makes you strong is what makes you weak. It's a double-edged sword. His creativity is his identity. But when it's 3rd and 1 and you're talking about Katron Allen breaking off these runs, why are we doing a double pass to the tight end? Why are we doing sprint out screens and weird stuff? Run the ball. So now we know they're going to play Notre Dame. He's going to have to toe that line of getting cute or just trusting his guys to do it. I think they missed the mark trusting the guys against Boise State at times.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. You and I have talked about this. I think there's such a weird philosophy about offensive play calling. And I'll even go as far as to say, and this was something that Jerry DiNardo, who you and I have both worked with, is a great football coach at Indiana, coach at LSU. But he always talked about how there was like this evolution of the offensive play caller from where these guys went from being in the booth to being down on the field all the time. And he swears it's because their agents told them to be on the sideline so they could be seen on TV more. And the reason I say that is I feel like offensive play callers, more than guys on defense, think that their scheme is the secret sauce. They think that the way that they call plays is the thing that matters the most. Not necessarily that if you just run inside zone, you're going to break it off for 8 or 9 yards every pop. It's the fact that they called the right play at the right time. It is their signature. They get carried away at times and they get lost in this idea of, well, my guys are averaging close to 8 yards a carry. Like maybe I should just give it to them. So I think there needs to be a conversation with Kotelnicki. And part of the reason he was brought in was to bring that creativity, was to do the shifts in the formations, the motions, and the different personnel grouping. So you can't take that away from him. But I do think there needs to be a directive from the head man that says if our guys are running the piss out the ball, then we need to just hand it to them. Like none of that extra stuff. You can do all the pre-snap you want, but like once you get into your final formation, it needs to be the run.
Bingo. And this is why I love this podcast, because you have such great insight. You're a national champion, and there's so many great stories that came out of this. So there's a great story Urban Meyer told about when you guys were playing Alabama. You could correct me if I'm wrong on this. First half comes and goes, and it's a close game at halftime. And Urban Meyer, again, he wasn't calling the plays. James Franklin isn't calling the plays. Urban Meyer is walking down the hallway back to the locker room. He passes the player locker room on his way to meet with the rest of the coaches. And on his way past the locker room, Pat Elflein grabs him by the chest and says, "Run the damn ball." And Urban he was caught off guard. He said it again, "Run the damn ball." And Urban walked back into the coach's office and he said, "Run the damn ball." That's what you're talking about right here. It's on. Yes, Kotelnicki is the play caller, but James has a responsibility as a head coach to say, "Hey, Andy, run the dang ball."
And to that point, it was Pat Elflein, it was Taylor Decker, and those guys had full control of that offensive line room. They were two of the best leaders on the team that year. To that point, Urban goes back there with the directive. We come out in the second half. Everybody knows that 85-yard run that Ezekiel Elliott had. I mean, he ran all over just about anybody that we played. And so the idea is when things are working, you should definitely lean into them. I did want to talk about Penn State's defense. As I mentioned, I thought they did a really good job of taking out threat number one of Ashton Jeanty. Of course, he's going to get his yards, but it wasn't a very productive day as a whole. Did not score a touchdown. As you mentioned, they forced 2 fumbles on him. Maddox Madsen, the quarterback, he had some plays, threw for over 300 yards, but I think the plan of attack was we'll let them throw it as long as Jeanty doesn't get his. Now, we were talking earlier in the day. You remarked to me that you think that this defense can win a championship for them. Yeah. I still think that they need to come along in the back end. I don't think they're a particularly fast secondary. But the more I've thought about it, I don't think it's too far off to say that if the offense plays to the level we know that they're playing, that defense doesn't need to do anything differently for them to be able to win a title this year.
Yeah, it's a lot of my philosophy is, and the key thing is going to be health as well. Obviously, Abdul Carter, the defense played outstanding, but when Abdul Carter left the game, there was an actual void you could feel on the field. That guy he is so disruptive. Everything changes when he's on the field. You could feel his absence. Wheatley in the back end, and they've already been beat up in the back end, particularly at the safety position. Wheatley is another injury in the back end of their defense to watch out for. So I believe that defense is disruptive enough, particularly the trenches, the defensive line, that they they'll keep them in game. No team's going to run them off the field. Oregon, it was shocking the result, but Penn State's defense is better than Oregon's defense, in my opinion. I think it's much, much better, and I can't see a world where Ohio State would do that to Penn State's defense. So I believe Penn State's defense can, at a minimum, keep them in every game.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I think that their front would certainly cause issues for Ohio State. Or they're getting ready to play Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a big run-the-ball team, so I think they can figure that out. But if they do have the opportunity to pass rush, I think they can cause issues. I don't think Notre Dame's weapons can hurt them in the secondary. Jeremiah Smith is hurting them. Emeka Egbuka is hurting them. Carnell Tate is hurting them. And so I do think it would be incumbent on that front to create as much havoc as possible. To your point, they can. For Abdul Carter, real quick, I was not sold on the guy. I did not like him as an NFL prospect because I felt like he picked when he wanted to be a great player. I don't think he played like a first-round pick all the time. I thought he chose his moments. If he decided he was going to show up, he was going to. If not, then you didn't know what to get out of him. He's changed the narrative to me, especially on the back half of the season, now here in the postseason. That man is bona fide. He is phenomenal. He to me is the number one rusher in this class. People have talked about James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. I don't think that guy's got a good pass rush tree. If he's not hitting you with the speed rush, if he's not getting held, he's not affecting the game. Abdul Carter can hit you with speed. He can hit you with power. He's got good inside counters. He's a guy who you could use as a spy. In the pass game, you could drop him into coverage if you need to. He's got every tool in the bag to be a great NFL player. And speaking of being a great NFL player,
can I add to that real quick?
Go ahead.
Chop Robinson is their most recent elite edge, Penn State's. Yeah. James Pierce is Chop Robinson. Abdul Carter was Chop Robinson, to your point, to start the season because of the speed. I mean, he's got that elite first step. That dude's speed is remarkable.
Twitched up.
But he has developed, to your point, which Chop, we both said it last year, Chop didn't do. Chop did not. His standout game was against Michigan, and it was all speed rush. There was no moves. Abdul, the foundation is his speed rush because it's elite, but he's developed a ton of moves, and his linebacker background helps him, to your point. The position flexibility and the ability to drop into coverage is key.
It's like Micah Parsons, right? Like we watch him take over the league. He played off ball in college, and I do think that transition is certainly a big deal there. I'll say this as an aside, and I know we're getting a little bit off topic. Pass rushing to me is a thinking man's game, right? Like you got to have the tools to be a great rusher, but you have to rush with a plan. When you get up to the line of scrimmage, you got to know your opponent. You got to know what their weaknesses are. You got to know which tools in your bag will hurt them the most. And then you got to understand who you are as a rusher. And so if you know that you're a speed guy, you got to set up with speed every time. But then you got to know which counters you can get to. Is this a guy where if you hit him with speed, he's going to open up his hips? If so, then you probably know that your inside counter is going to be next. Is this a guy, if you hit him with speed, who's just going to retreat? If you know that and he doesn't have an anchor, that's when you hit him with the power rush. But you have to constantly be thinking about what your next move is. Every move is a setup to get to the next one. You don't just run off the ball and try to get sacks. If you do that, they'll block you every time. I just know I got a kick. And I think that Abdul Carter has figured out the idea that pass rushing is a thinking man's game.
I've always felt it was like running a miniature route. You know, my background as a tight end, I understand having to create separation and route guys up. That's kind of pass rushing in its own way. To your point, it's a miniature version of that.
No doubt, no doubt. And I'm excited to see not only the finish to this playoff run for Penn State and particularly Abdul Carter, but what he does when he gets to the next level. He's going to be phenomenal. I mentioned it. We want to talk next level in particular with the quarterback in Drew Aller. He said that he is coming back for one more year, which I don't think is a bad decision. I also would say that he would be no worse than QB3 right now, considering the guys that are in the draft. You've got Shedeur Sanders, who I like the most. Cam Ward is going to be right there. Jalen Milroe declared today he is a do not draft to me. I think he'll get a GM fired because he rides the wave too much.
Yep.
Quinn Ewers is a question mark, and I don't think he can come back to Texas. If he stays, he's going to have to transfer. But if he comes out, I don't love him. We'll talk about Texas here when we preview their game against Ohio State. Should Drew Aller reconsider?
Everything you just said, like Drew's got more power in his left hand than Quinn Ewers has throwing the ball. You know, what we've seen in this since the Oregon game. I talked about this on our show. Drew Aller, For those, you guys should just Google him. If you don't, look at a picture of him, baby face, no hair on his face. He's a soft-spoken kid. He was a little soft when he got on campus too, like his body type. He was 245 pounds, but this offseason, he lost weight. He got down to 230. He had to kill the boy to be the man. He is the man now since that Oregon game. And I completely agree, no lower than the third best quarterback. And I know he's a guy that once he gets in front of scouts, GMs, and coaches at the combine, and they see that ball jump out of his hands, what happens is one quarterback goes, then the next goes, and they start reaching. Because I believe he'd be QB3, and then there's a big gap. We're talking about 15 million plus, maybe 20 million plus, and Penn State's not paying that. He's going to get a good deal. Penn State's not paying him 15, 20, though.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to me. And one of my colleagues at NBC, Matt Castle, sat down with him during the season, and they did a phenomenal feature. But listening to him talk about his progression as he addresses the line of scrimmage, what they do with the motions to try to ID coverages, and then what his thought process is once he has once he's identified the picture, how he can move a safety to get to the look that he wants. The thing about him is I think he's undersold to the college football viewer because he'll end the game 13 of 25 with 171. But the thing about it is his wide receivers ain't that good. Right. They're not doing him any favors. Yes. And he still goes out there and puts the ball on the money. I look at this and I say, I watched Will Howard throw the ball up to Jeremiah Smith or even Carnell Tate or even Emeka Egbuka. And Jeremiah Smith, your job as a quarterback at some point is to put the ball on the money, ball location, make a 50-50 ball because of your accuracy, location, and timing. The quarterback can push that to 55-60. And then Jeremiah Smith, because of his talent, pushes it to 70-75. Drew some of those throws in the red zone. His receivers left another 2 or 3 touchdowns on the field because some of those throws down in the red zone were on the money. Boise State's defenders were in good position, but they didn't bat the ball. And his receivers aren't winning those 50-50 balls. I'm trying to think of a time when I remember his receivers winning a 50-50 ball, and I can't off the top of my head, whereas with Ohio State, I could think of countless. Other than Tyler Warren. I mean, of course, Tyler Warren, but not his receivers. No, I'm there with you. And it's the reason why I like him so much as a prospect. I think that he's a ball location specialist. You have to be in the NFL because the windows are tight. And certainly there are guys who can just route people up, but you're not doing that against NFL corners, route in and route out. Yep. It's the reason why I love Shedeur Sanders. I know this ain't a Big 12 podcast, but in terms of ball location, I think he's really good. Those are 2 guys I like the most in that category. All right, I want to flip it over to the quarterfinal game that we watched tonight, the night that we're recording this. Notre Dame gets the victory over the vaunted Georgia Bulldogs, 23-10. This will be the opponent that Penn State faces in the semifinal. And as an aside here, you got 2 black coaches in this game, which would guarantee a black coach in the national title game. Matt Fortuna put the tweet out. That would be the first time ever. So this is history as well, which is pretty cool here. But Marcus Freeman leads his guys. They had that loss to NIU. People thought it was kind of, it might be one of those years that would be forgettable. The seat could have gotten hot for Marcus Freeman, and they've won 12 straight games since then. Riley Leonard put the team on his back. The dude can't throw the ball, in my opinion. He threw it for 90 yards. Doesn't matter because if he's going to give you 6 yards per carry in the rushing game, and these are not with the sack numbers taken out, really hard, right? It's really difficult to try to stop this offense from the standpoint of their identity. Defensively, I thought their secondary gave up more plays than I would have imagined in this matchup. They're physical, and they don't stop. Mm-hmm. This team to me is dangerous. And I kind of want to put this out here before we get into the X's and O's of what we just watched here. We could also be looking at a scenario where Indiana might have lost to the 2 best teams in the country as their only 2 losses this year in Ohio State and in Notre Dame. Just for all the people who had the Indiana hate, after their appearance in the playoff. Neither here nor there. What did you see out of Notre Dame?
That you're saying something.
I'm just saying. I'm just putting it out there.
I'm just pointing it out. You're just pointing it out. You're really saying something, especially with the flack they caught, especially with Bama losing and South Carolina losing.
Yeah,
shout out to Indiana. But hey, how about the coaching though too? Talking about having your team ready to play. Credit to Marcus Freeman. And Kirby's been here before. Kirby's won titles, so I was really interested to see that dynamic. But Marcus Freeman had his team ready, and you look at there was a 4th and 2 or 4th where he had the punt team out there and he ran them off the field real quick.
Yep.
Coaching, preparation, special teams coming out of half, coaching, preparation, understanding your quarterback's limits, coaching and preparation.
Let me talk about that play where they did the line shift real quick. So they actually had a false start on that play, and it wasn't caught.
Hey,
but the guts and the thought process to get to a point where you say, we're going to let the clock run a little bit. We're going to send the punt team out there. We're going to run our offense on. And we know that they have to allow the defense to sub. But they're going to be so discombobulated. They're going to be so worried about our quarterback running the football that they're going to jump. And then the presence of mind for the center to get the ball back there. If you're really watching that play, Riley Leonard wasn't fully prepared for that snap. I think he was prepared for the timeout. And the ball comes to him. They get it out there. Almost was a completion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've ever really seen anything like it, but we have talked about how when you are trying to win a championship, you have to be phenomenal in the margins. And typically that comes from situations and it comes from special teams. To your point, had a big return, huge on the special teams. And then they have that situation where they try something a little unconventional and it works for them.
And they got a kicker that's kicking field goals too. So special teams, there's a few areas that you can watch. Special teams is one, wide receiver blocking is another.
Yep.
Pursuit away from the football defensively are like 3 characteristics that will tell me so much. That'll tell me 80% of what I need to know about your football team. And it's a reflection of your head coach. So all those areas, credit to Marcus Freeman.
Yeah. So I think this is going to be an interesting matchup, and we'll get to kind of a preview here. But for Notre Dame, I think the thing that benefits them the most in this postseason and why they were able to win all those games since NIU, they figured out what their identity is as a ball club.
Mm-hmm.
Defense has been phenomenal. They got more points off of takeaways than anybody in college football. They run the football. They want to be physical on offense. And then to your point, special teams, they've got great block units. They got the return. They understand that that's a facet of the game that needs to be important to them, because I do think they are limited on the offensive side. The last Big Ten team that we'll talk about, it's 2 Big Ten teams here. Those Ohio State Buckeyes are rolling.
Wow.
41-21 in the Rose Bowl. Number 8 takes down number 1. Just to start this one off, Will Howard, one of his most productive days as a Buckeye, 319 yards, 3 touchdowns. The run game popped when it needed to. Travion Henderson, 8 carries, 94 yards, couple touchdowns. Quinshon Judkins throws another 85 in there on the ground. But it was really the freshman, the alien, the one-of-a-kind man, Jeremiah Smith, early and often. 7 receptions, 187 yards, 2 touchdowns. They targeted him 10 times, which is right where they need to be. 63 yards after the catch. It was thorough from that aspect. But then I flip it over to the defense, because that was really the problem the first time they played. They had 8 sacks, 13 TFLs total, and they were smacking dudes in the face all night long. It was coming off of the Tennessee game where Ohio State was dominant. This was the most complete one to me, because I think Oregon is a phenomenal football team. And they got up 34-0 on them and didn't look back.
Since the Tennessee game, that's been 120 minutes of football, 2 60-minute games. I don't mean this like lightly. I'm not just saying this because it's a headline. That's the best 120 minutes, consecutive 120 minutes of football that I can remember watching in my lifetime. I really can't think, you know what I mean? I really can't think of more dominant against better opponents in a higher pressure situation. Of course, the pressure is going to build semis and natty, but Ryan Day was on the hot seat.
Yeah.
And they needed this to happen. Oregon coming off, they had the added time. They already beat you. Your offensive line is injured. You're going to get their best shot. And dominated them in a way I genuinely did not think was possible. I didn't. Yeah. You could have convinced me Ohio State wins by multiple scores, you know.
Right.
But the way they dominated them, I did not think that was possible. That's a 13-0 undefeated Big Ten champ Oregon football team. And they ran them off the field like they were a JV's team. It was nuts.
No, it was nuts. And we've talked about this this evolution since the Michigan loss for Ohio State. And I think a lot of it is the game plan and the urgency for coaches to put players in the best position, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And we've seen that. But you can tell Ryan Day feels the urgency, right? You mentioned the job security aspect of it. I think that would be a motivator to anybody. But there are also players in that room who came back and they said, we want to beat Michigan. We want to win a Big Ten championship. We want to win a national title. And they went 0-2 on the first two, and they've got an opportunity to do the third one, which is the most important thing in the sport, being a champion. And I think they're really motivated to it. This is when this team is playing like this, it is exactly what people said it was going to be in the preseason. It is the most dominant team. It is the best team. That collection of talent looks the way that they need to. And I don't know what's going to hold them back outside of themselves coming in there and thinking that they can play with their food. I do want to flip it to the Oregon side of this, though, because it was a great year. You mentioned 13-0. Dan Lanning was like the face of the Big Ten, right? Oregon's the face of the Big Ten in terms of programs. And it was a great year. Come up short in the postseason. I know there's going to be a lot of consternation about that from Oregon fans. How would you characterize this year for them?
It's still a success. It's still a success. It's the word, you have to call it a success. You know, it'd be unfair to judge success and failure based off a national title because there's only one. Then you have 100+ failures. There's only one national. So it's still a success. Certainly disappointing. But you look at year one coming into the Big Ten, Dan Lanning. We knew they were going to be competitive. Them and Ohio State were the two favorites picked to win the conference. They had a good roster, really good roster, but just roster to roster, that Ohio State has a better roster than Oregon and a better roster than anybody. So with that in mind, to go undefeated in the regular season, to win the Big Ten title year one, very impressive. They also took down the three-headed monster. They beat Ohio State. Then they beat Michigan on the road, and then they beat Penn State. So, like, in year one, if you just told Dan Lanning that's going to be year one, he'd say, well, what about the national title? You say, hey, you're not going to get it. I think he'd be, okay, that's a really good season. So, to me, it's still a successful season.
I would say the same thing. I feel like the arrow has to be pointing up for Oregon, and it's certainly going to be hard to replicate what they did throughout the regular season. I think that they just need to be in a position to have similar results there and try to make a run and actually win games in the postseason. But, for a young coach and transitioning into a new conference and immediately becoming the guy, you beat your rival, you won the conference. Like, I do think it's a big deal. I will say this, though, about their particular game in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. I was underwhelmed by Will Stein and his offensive game plan. I don't think he did as good of a job as I've seen him do in manipulating the pieces on defense to get the guys in the advantageous situations. Part of that is Ohio State did what they needed to do, right? Like, there's resistance out there, and so I'm not trying to take anything away from that standpoint. But their best plays were plays where Dylan Gabriel was able to improvise and where he was able to extend them. It wasn't something where it's like dialed up, coach had him in the perfect position, they had the perfect play on. And he's been a guy who's been able to do that.
What I saw was a guy in Dylan Gabriel all season. Gabriel, one of his big strengths is even as a smaller guy, he's looked consistently poised in the pocket. He converted a 4th and 1 in the first matchup, converted a couple 4th downs in the Big Ten championship. He's done some special things. To me, it looked like Dylan Gabriel didn't know what he was seeing. Like he almost didn't look. They didn't seem prepared for what Ohio State was presenting. So I don't know. To me, maybe you can point to it. I didn't see anything exotic that Ohio State did, but it just certainly looked like Dylan Gabriel wasn't either trusting his eyes. He was playing slower.
Yeah, I think they did a good job of mixing up the coverages. Certainly did a great job with Caleb Downs in the back end, but they played a lot of shell coverages. Like you would see the pre-snap picture, and it was 5 guys in the secondary basically all aligned like a picket fence. And it was saying, throw the ball short and we'll rally and tackle. And I do think that kind of is disconcerting, especially when Caleb has the ability to roam back there. I do think,
and with Evan Stewart, losing Evan Stewart in warmups is like
which is crazy.
That's a big loss.
Yeah. But I talked about this on a different program, and I do think it matters, is the pressures on the team, in my opinion, who won the first matchup, not because it's hard to beat the same team in two times in a year. We watched Washington do it with Oregon a couple times last year. The reason for me is when you're Oregon, you went 13-0 and you got all that time off and you're trying to figure out what your team is. You're like, well, we kind of know. We made our adjustments early in the year. We were giving up sacks early in the year. Now we got the offensive line figured out. Our defense maybe was a little bit porous. Guys weren't running to the football. We got all of our stuff figured out. When you're Ohio State, you lose to Oregon. They made a metamorphosis on defense. They totally shifted to something different to allow more pressure, right? When you're Ohio State and you lose to Michigan, you scrap the whole offense and you say, we're going to approach this differently because it didn't work. And I think Ohio State was a more different team than Oregon because they had to change more things. And that's the challenge when you played so well through the regular season. It's like, how much do we upset the apple cart to give ourselves an edge when we know we've played well enough just doing what we do?
See, that's why I do put, I do give merit to that it's hard to beat a good team twice because when you lose, there's no question even to be asked. When you lose, you say, oh, we have to make changes. Okay. And like Ohio State did, so even like schematically, like bringing in some different packages defensively. But for Oregon, to your point, like, you have to – I can see how Dan Lanning and Will Stein and Dylan Gabriel and Tosh Lupoi would say, actually, we've been really good and we're playing some of our best football down the stretch. We don't need to change. We are who we are. And that's tough because when you're the winner, you don't know whether or not you should change. Ohio State made the adjustments. They didn't.
Yeah, I made this comment, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, and we'll get to previewing the semifinals here. I made a comment that it's easy to go 12 or 13-0, and people looked at me like I was crazy. And it's probably just because stupid my background, because not a lot of teams do it. But went 12-0 my freshman year, went 12-0 my sophomore year. We won 24 straight games, but it wasn't until we got into the postseason my sophomore year. We lost the Big Ten championship. We lost the bowl game, and you start to understand that when the lights are on and when it's do or die and all of the pressure is there because you don't get a mulligan, you don't have next week to get up and go play the game, things become different. And you have to make that decision of how much do we change? How much do we get the work in on the time off, right? Like Dan Lanning was probably asking himself the question, we got a veteran team. I like our quarterback. Do we need to hit a ton? Do we not? How much do I need to press these guys? Do I pull back off of them? Those are all of the things you start thinking about. And it can become confusing because you've done so well to the point where you get in the postseason lay an egg.
I can see it. And that's what we talked about in our show leading up to it, where, Urban Meyer, again, I keep going back to Urban, but he said the first time, he was playing in the national title game, I think he called up Lou Holtz. He said the first thing he did was he called up Lou Holtz to get advice in terms of how to handle that break. And I don't know, obviously, we don't know what Dan Lanning did, but clearly the Ducks were not prepared for what Ohio State was bringing in the Rose Bowl out in Pasadena.
Yeah, I mean, when you get off to a start like that, it feels to me like they missed something in the lead up there because they fought, right? Like I give them a ton of credit. They started to turn the momentum a little bit in that game. But when you get off to a start like that, to me, it's like what happened in that month between games.
Defensively.
That would make you start like that.
For Ohio State to score, like the real time must have been like in terms of they scored. It was insane to watch almost.
Yeah, I know.
Because it was like 20-second drives of Ohio State just going bam, like a race car right down the field, touchdown.
It was one of the most astounding things that I've seen. And I don't know. I mean, I
thought I was in like a haze from how quickly they were scoring.
Dude, I was
so fast.
I was watching Arizona State and Texas finish up, and then the game flips on. And there were 2 minutes of game clock that ran off, and Oregon was already punting. Ohio State had scored, and then Ohio State goes right down the field. I'm like, damn, I missed all the action. Like, that's how quick the thing went, man. It was absolutely wild. But let's get to the Cotton Bowl preview. So it's Texas, it's Ohio State, right there in Texas' backyard. I think Ohio State's a 6-point favorite the last time I looked at the spread there. I'll just start off with this. I think that Texas has a good enough defense to be able to cause some trouble for Ohio State. I think they're stout up front. I like their linebackers, and they've got a really good secondary. They had, I think, the Thorpe winner back there, just like, dudes in the secondary. I think Texas's offense is a paper tiger. I don't think they like being hit. Their offensive line's a little bit banged up. Their running back room has been banged up all year. Wide receivers don't get open on their own. It's really relying on Sark and his scheme, and I give him a ton of credit. He is the best play designer, sequential play caller in college football, in my opinion, right now. And Quinn Ewers has this thing where it's like he's trying to make the perfect pass every time by placing the ball, but it's all touch. He can't drive the ball in the intermediate, doesn't drive it out to the sideline, and the ball will hang in the air. I think this is going to be an interesting one because I could see this one going on the lower scoring side of things based off of the way I think these two defenses are playing.
Well, I remember we were talking too about Texas's season, and there was some question marks about how much they'd been tested this season, and I look at, Arizona State, it took them a little while, but they were able to move the ball. They were able to move the ball. Even Clemson at times was able to move the ball. I agree with you about everything you said about Texas's secondary. Honestly, roster to roster, these are two of the best rosters. Like, this is what we were talking about preseason.
They're two of the top 3 highest paid rosters too.
Yes. This is realistically an NFL matchup, but like, truth be told, Joshua, like that version, we've seen Texas at their best. It was probably when they played Michigan, right? How well oiled they looked.
Yeah.
We just saw Ohio State at their best. Right. I don't think I can see if both teams are at their best. I still think Ohio State wins by double digits. That's how good Ohio State's playing right now.
I agree with that. I'm trying to temper it to where I don't know if we get what we saw the last 2 games. Like that's a hard thing to keep up in the third game. But I do think that there is this aspect of like, I mean, to your point, I don't know who Texas has really played where I could say that's a comp for Ohio State. Even the 2 losses to Georgia, like Georgia's had quarterback questions. They haven't run it very consistently. Their defense has been up and down. Certainly they played their best defense.
Smoked by Notre Dame. Like Notre Dame
But we just watched them get smoked by Notre Dame. And that's the thing about it here. So I'm curious, like it is going to be about Ohio State. It's going to be about the start. They started fast against Tennessee. They started fast against Oregon. Got to do it against Texas. But I think that Texas is talented enough. And Sark with his play design, certainly on offense, is going to get his. It's going to be an interesting one. I'm excited for this semifinal.
I agree with you, Sark, from the mind of Sark. Yeah. Sure. But the mind of Quinn Ewers.
Yeah.
Very uncertain. And
I know.
There is a beast that was woken up in that Buckeye defensive line to go from 0 sacks in the first matchup against Oregon to 8 sacks. They were in the backfield the entire day. It was a beatdown. It was an absolute beatdown. And Texas has got a great offensive line, right? Like Oregon has 2 good tackles too.
But they're banged up though.
But they're banged up, and Quinn Ewers is banged up.
Yeah. He doesn't like getting hit. The one thing I've noticed is he'll duck, which is a tough spot to be in. Ohio State's got to weather, in my opinion, with Texas's offense, first 10 plays of the initial drive, the first 10 plays of the second half, because that's when Sark is really in his bag. And that's when he's got his menu out of all the design plays, of all the different scheme that he wants to run, the looks that he wants to show, the ways that he wants to identify what Ohio State is doing defensively. That's where he's very dangerous. I think once you settle in to the drives after that, that's when you can start to pin your ears back. That's when you can say, how are we going to chase this quarterback down? That's where you can say, we're going to mix up our coverages a little bit and see if we can't make it hard to throw into some windows for a quarterback who doesn't drive the football. Those are the things that I'll be looking at for the Ohio State side. All right, we got to talk about this Orange Bowl here. So we know it's Penn State. Now we know it's Notre Dame. Very intrigued by this matchup. I think two defenses that have played phenomenally, two offenses that are very flawed to me. We've talked about both of the flaws. Notre Dame flat out does not throw the ball very well. It's a quarterback issue. It's also a wide receiver issue. For Penn State, it is this inconsistency. If we get the offense we saw when they played Oregon, I think that they can win this game pretty comfortably. If we get the offense that we saw in other parts of the year, the one that we saw against Ohio State that wasn't necessarily great, the one that we saw against Boise State that had some questionable play calling, this becomes a little bit more difficult to project.
Yeah. If we start with what we know, Notre Dame, that's a limited offense. They're a good run game, great running backs. Riley Leonard, a capable runner. But you mentioned this earlier. This is a good match. This is a favorable matchup for Penn State. That is an elite front seven. Elite front seven. Secondary, I won't say bad, but I'm not going to say elite either. Riley Leonard he's not the guy you're going to test that back. They're not going to test the back end of Penn State.
And they're not going to do it with the receivers either.
No, that's where this is very favorable for Penn State. If there was ever a defense that's built to shut down the run, it's that front. Look what they just did to Boise State and Ashton Jeanty. So from that standpoint, I think it's going to be hard for Notre Dame to score points. I give a lot of respect to Notre Dame's defense now too. Where are you at with this matchup of Penn State's offense against Notre Dame's defense?
It's if they call a game that feels right in terms of the play design, in terms of the sequencing of plays. I don't think Andy Kotelnicki does a very good job of sequencing of plays. And for people out there, because I mentioned it a few times when I was talking about Sark, what I mean by that is, let's say that you're a team and you say that your run of the week is going to be the counter. So you have your counter schemes, then you have maybe the quarterback run off of the counter. Then you have the reverse that comes off of the counter. Then you've got your play action looks that come off of the counter. These are all things that you sequence in. When I look at Penn State, it looks like he's just calling plays off of a menu. Okay, we're going to go inside zone here. Okay, maybe we're going to throw in a counter. Okay, maybe we're just going to do straight drop back. Now we're going to do a throwback screen. Now we're going to throw in play action. It's like, why are you play action? You haven't run the ball all drive. That doesn't make sense from a sequencing standpoint. If they can get that part of it figured out, I think that they have enough with the quarterback, and I think that they have enough with the run game that they can have success against Notre Dame's defense. The issue that I see for Penn State, those wide receivers are going to have their hands full. Notre Dame's secondary has played really good ball for a lot of the year. Even in games where they've given up some yards, they have made the timely plays in the back end. That's going to be the challenge for Penn State.
Yeah, it's the one thing I'd be concerned or something I want to watch, and this coming off of this Boise State in particular, is Notre Dame's not shy about bringing pressure. They're going to bring pressure. Penn State, particularly the interior of their offensive line, really struggled to pick up some of Boise's blitz. Boise brought a lot of pressure, a lot of cross dogs, a lot of A and B gap blitzes, and the center guard and the running back were not always on the same page. Drew Aller was under duress on a number of different occasions. You're going to get a heavy dose of that out of Notre Dame. So, oftentimes these games come down to a handful of moments. Illinois, South Carolina, for example, as a game. Moments. You get fourth down situations, third down situations, like a handful of moments you could say Illinois rose to the occasion or South Carolina didn't. this is a career-defining opportunity for James Franklin, because this is a game going into this. I would feel, based on his history, I feel a little bit uneasy about his ability to lead this team and get them to show up in the biggest moments against Notre Dame. But it also, that being said, it also is an opportunity for him to elevate and put that narrative to the side. Of all the teams he's coached, based on the way they're playing right now, based on what we've seen from Drew Aller and what we've talked about, based on their safety valve with Tyler Warren and their running backs in the backfield, this feels like a year where they're capable of taking that next step.
It has to be, right? Like, I think this is the opportunity. We talked about the path for Penn State, where you get SMU, who we thought had a good season, but certainly your roster was much better. And then you get Boise State, which is the same situation. Great season, Ashton Jeanty, really good. But you've got one thing that you have to worry about, and your roster is much better. Now you get into one of those talent-equated games, and the stakes are getting much higher. And I think for James Franklin, now is the opportunity. You got it exactly to where you wanted it to be. You avoided Georgia, who felt like the team that if they put it together, that's the team where you're like, damn, they could really hurt us because they're so talented, because they've been there before. You avoided that. And so I do think this is the opportunity for him. Very excited to watch that one in particular, because I think it's going to be a very fun game. Before we get out of here, I wanted to ask you, Michigan Wolverines beat Ohio State as a 3-touchdown dog. And then I think there were a 16-point dog to Alabama.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about the SEC, and Alabama got left out and they should have been in. Michigan had every elite player on that roster opt out, which I have no problem with. They rolled out there with Davis Warren and Alex Orji. They rolled out there with Jordan Marshall, who's a freshman running back. I think he's from the state of Ohio, which really pisses me off.
He won Mr. Ohio. He won Mr. Ohio.
Neither here nor there right now. They rolled out there with the secondary that wasn't at full strength. And there was a point in the second quarter where Alabama had 2 freaking yards of offense. And they got Ryan Williams, who's one of the best freshmen in the country at wide receiver. And they've got Jalen Milroe, who today, the day we're recording this, declared for the NFL draft playing quarterback in that bowl game. And they beat him. So you tell me how you're feeling about the Michigan Wolverines right now.
As you can see how I'm feeling. I don't even know if I can describe how I'm feeling, because it doesn't make sense. How did that happen? How did that happen? How Kalen DeBoer? My goodness, Kalen DeBoer. Oh my goodness. This is their first. When was the last time they didn't have a 10-win season? That's the other thing. Bama needed it. Kalen DeBoer needed this game. That's why everybody played. He needed to get to 10 wins. The standard is to win national titles. But now you're talking about getting to 10 wins, and you're playing a deplete. Like, again, how the hell did that just happen? I don't know, but I give so much credit to Sharon.
I do
so
too.
much credit. If you're going to dish it out, which it was fair, you have to give the praise when it's time. The way he has led this team, leadership is how you win a game in Columbus against Ohio State. Right. Leadership is how you pull that off. I give a ton of credit to Sharon.
You know, Jake, I'm very happy for you for 3 reasons right now. One of the reasons I'm not going to say here, but the other reason is because you and I have developed a really good relationship. And when you feel joy, I tend to feel joy too. But the other reason is because they beat the SEC, right? And it's like we've gotten to this weird place, and you and I are both
reason. Yes,
you and I are both members of the media, and it's like people actively root against the SEC. But I think it's this balancing thing where there are so many people who will go out of their way to defend the SEC when they don't deserve the grace that they're getting. And the discourse got so off the rails where it's like, oh, Alabama should have been in over SMU and Indiana. And I'm trying to tell people every reason why they shouldn't. And they displayed it against Michigan in the bowl game. That is a quarterback who's entirely too erratic. That is a team that will decide to no-show games. They didn't deserve to be in the college football playoff. Of course, you had the South Carolina thing, they should have had a case to him. Brett Bielema punches them in the freaking face. And it's just Tennessee got run off the field by Ohio State. All of the different things there. But I do feel like we're in its moment right now where it feels like there's a bit of a changing of the guard, and it's because they can't hoard talent down south. And also you can pay everybody above the table now. Yeah. And we know how that was going before. All of that to say, I think the Michigan thing is so interesting. And there is a unique momentum for a team that only won 8 games where the quarter, and I talked to somebody who's in that building yesterday. The quarterback of the future is on campus, and they think that guy is going to be as advertised.
Wow.
They've got Justice Haynes coming in as a transfer at running back, plus Marshall, who had a phenomenal game. They think that the defense is going to be in a really good spot, and everybody thinks Sharon Moore was the right hire. When there were questions about that at the beginning of the year, momentum in Ann Arbor right now, Jake.
100%. And then you factor in one of the big downfalls this year was the how unbelievably hard the schedule was. Look at the schedule next year. Nothing even close to that. So the stars are aligning, and Sharon chance to capture some of that momentum. So I don't know, man. I can't make sense of it. I had accepted that, that game was not about winning and losing. I had accepted it was about.
Yeah, you did. You tried to say it was meaningless, and now it's got some meaning, doesn't it?
Somehow, some way, it felt meaningless. Shoot, but yeah, no.
Not to me. I love all the games.
Yeah, we'll take that. We will take that all day. I mean, holy cow. And as far as the SEC goes, they do it to themselves.
They do.
I do not feel bad for them. For them to disrespect Indiana while the game was still going on, that has sat so wrong with me for so long. I'm sorry. This is, you guys have had this coming. SEC fans, you had it coming.
No, I mean, let's really talk about it though. I mentioned the Indiana thing where their 2 losses might have been to the 2 best teams in college football, and 2 teams that can make the national title this year. So they were disrespectful about that, and they shouldn't have been. Tennessee got their doors blown off. Those guys had no interest in being in the cold. They couldn't hold Ohio State's jock that night. Yep. And I think if they played that game again, it would be the same outcome there. What Michigan did to Alabama should be embarrassed. That was an embarrassing performance for them for all the stumping that people did. And then
they whined and cried and complained.
I'm not done yet. What happened to Georgia and Notre Dame just confidently standing up to them, smacking them all day long. And the thing we didn't talk about when we were talking about Texas, they got lucky. That targeting call. They had the game in hand, and Arizona State's like, no, we're going to try to make this, and they almost did it. So all of that to say, this ain't what it used to be.
No.
And I think when we talk about this sport from a holistic view, we can't just go in there and say because their rosters are more talented than everybody else's at the very top end, that we just give them the benefit of the doubt. And the results of games don't matter. There were games that were played. We watched Alabama go out there and lose to 2 bad teams. Their quarterback threw interceptions in those games. They had to go on the road to do it, which they would have done in the playoff. They couldn't figure it out, right? Like we watched these different things and we tried to excuse it because we think their roster is better. We're done with that. They have run out of any leash that they had.
Yep. No, you just laid it all out. I can understand a logical debate, and I can admit when I'm wrong, and there was I understood some of there was logic. I understand Alabama, pitching their chance to get in. I understand South Carolina.
Totally get it too.
But the whining, the crying, the putting down of others, the disrespect of the Big Ten. This has been going on for years too. The disrespect of the Big Ten and other conferences as a whole. Because there's been years in the making where people are saying, hey, this is not a decade and a half ago when you guys were playing by a different set of rules and paying players. Everybody's paying players now, and look what? Guess what?
Yeah, it was the disrespect for me. Like they talked about and to us like our fans don't know how to watch games and know how to identify good football. And that people who are a part of Northern media were the same way. Like the Paul Feinbaums of the world look at us like we don't know how to watch good football because they don't think we have it.
Right.
Y'all got Texas. You better hope that Texas can make the run here and save the name of the SEC, because outside of that, it's all Northern football right now.
Yeah. Gosh, and even Texas, the only of all the teams they were one of the heaviest. They might have been the heaviest favorite. Should have lost. Everyone else handled business. Everyone else handled business. So
this finish of this playoff is going to be interesting. But me and Jake had to get some venting out of the way there. First show of 2025, Jake Butt. I thought it went extremely well. Excited to get started off on a great year with you hosting this podcast. And hosting the Big College Football Show on CHSN. You can catch Monday through Thursday at 5 Central. But that's going to do it for us, man. We appreciate everybody's time. We'll holler at you soon.
Yeah.